Hello everyone, this is Mr. Anderson. This is your second installment of the World History webcast. Today I'm going to be talking about the Age of Empires. That's our second core unit where we begin to talk about ancient empires. And I'm going to go over this in broad strokes because we go over it in detail in class and in the readings. And our activities are based upon the idea of these ancient empires. The most important that we talk about is Greece and the legacy of Greece and Hellenism, which I'll get to in a moment. But first, I need to recognize and speak about some other empires that are important. The Persians. I'll talk about first briefly. The Persians were interesting because they organized their vast Eurasian empire into something called satrapies, which were effectively like provinces, or like the United States in the States, where each satrapy had a governor, had their own standing army, also had representatives of the king to watch what the governor was doing and watch what the army of the satrapy was doing, which was interesting. In a large empire that takes months and months to ride across on horseback or even longer by foot, it was important for these Persian empires to have their empire divided into these governing bodies so that they could effectively keep their empire together but also get the most out of it. The Persians also believed in a religion called Zoroastrianism across their empire, which was the worship of a god named Ahura Mazda, and they believed in a delineation between a god of light and a god of darkness, and a heaven and a hell, and when you died, they believed you would be judged and you would be sent to either a heaven or a hell. And you see some of the beginnings of this idea that would be extended into Judaism, Christianity, and Islamic faiths, which are now called Abrahamic faiths. The Persians also started standardized weights and measures, which made for easier trade across their empire for obvious reasons. They also developed passports for their merchants so that when they're trading from one end of their empire to the next, or perhaps in the Mediterranean Sea or the Black Sea, these merchants, when confronted by a naval force or the Persian Navy, could present their passport and say, here, yeah, we're legitimate merchants and we've been okayed by the emperor. They also developed a money economy in that the Persians were the first to, for the most part, stamp coins with the emperor's face on it using precious metals, silver, bronze, gold, or copper, and you could trade those. The idea was, now it's second nature to us, but trading an item for equal value for that coin instead of just a barter system where you give a wheel of cheese for perhaps a basket. Instead, now you could trade that basket for a silver coin. And so the Persians ruled over a large empire that came into contentiousness with the Greeks. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The Athenians, one of the main rivals of the Persians, the Athenians came from a city-state called Athens. Greece wasn't what we think of it today. It was a loose network of city-states that came together for mutual benefit and oftentimes warred against one another. But the Athenians came to lead this league called the Delian League, which was this network of Greek city-states, and they came to be the most important and leading city-state, so much so that they would tax the other city-states and use some of that money to build things like the Parthenon, or a 39-foot high statue of Athena near the Parthenon. And so instead of taking the taxes from the other city-states to use for mutual protection, the Athenians over time used those taxes for the betterment of Athenian society. And like I said, they built the Parthenon, the statue of Athens, but the Athenian empire, if you will, would not last an extended period of time. During the Peloponnesian Wars, the Spartans would best the Athenians and come to dominate Athens. But nonetheless, that Greek culture and that Greek society was one of these city-states trying to exert influence on another, and for a time Athens was the most powerful, and their culture and their identity would last throughout the ages through being spread by something called Hellenism, which I'll get to in a moment. Alexander the Great, perhaps the most important thing we're going to take a look at this week. I'll talk about him in just a moment, but one thing it is certain is Alexander the Great, in the span of 13 years, dominated a great portion of the known Eastern world. And upon his death, when asked who he would leave his empire to, he said, to the strongest. Not exactly a clear way of handing off your empire. And so three major generals would fight over his empire One would end up retaining the Macedonian kind of Greek empire. Another general called Ptolemy would take over the Egyptian area and would found something called the Ptolemaic Empire. That starts with a P, Ptolemaic, Ptolemaic. The P is silent, empire. And then Seleucus would form the Seleucid Empire, which was kind of the remnants of the Persian Empire. I'll talk about the Ptolemaics first. Ptolemaics are interesting because they were Greek-speaking, but they would rule over Egypt for 300 years. In fact, the last Ptolemaic ruler would be Cleopatra, and they ruled over probably the most vibrant city in the ancient world, which was Alexandria, a center of learning and culture and just absolute metropolitan. It was the New York City of the ancient world. There were Jews, there were Egyptians, there were Macedonians, there were Greeks, there was people, sailors and learned philosophers all coming to be at Alexandria. And there was a famous library at Alexandria that people would come study at. It was kind of the first of its kind. And they were important in the ancient world, but like I said, the Ptolemaic Empire would come to an end at the hands of the Romans. The Seleucids were important because the Seleucids ruled over the lands that the Persians had, and they encouraged Greek settlement. They encouraged Greek settlers to come out to this land, to the Middle East, to the Anatolian Peninsula, and they would settle, thus spreading Greek culture, Greek values, and the Greek language, which would develop into this thing called Hellenism, again, which I'll get there in a moment. And then you have, of course, the Marians, which is an empire that spanned from the Hindu Kush Mountains to the Indus River Valley. It was began by Chandragupta Maurya. They also divided their lands into provinces and districts, and trade flourished between Indo-Mediterranean and the Mauryan Empire. And so this is a time where, although it is an ancient time, there's trade. Empires allow for safety. When you have an empire and you have a solid empire and you have a standing army and you have roads that are protected, it's going to allow for trade to go back and forth. And there's some mutual benefit there. One of the most important Mauryan empires was Asoka, who used Buddhist beliefs after his own revelation, which we talked about in class over, bloodlust. Was he became this devout Buddhist and would use Buddhist teachings in order to rule his empire. But I want to backtrack again to Alexander the Great, and we discuss at length Alexander the Great in the classroom and his importance in spreading Macedonian culture and Greek culture more foremost. Macedonia was a northern area just above what was kind of Greece proper, which were those city-states like Athens, like Sparta, like Ionia and Thebes. And these organized city-states kind of looked up at the Macedonians like these backwater kind of hillbillies, and the Macedonians would prove to be anything but. Philip II would organize his Macedonian rugged, tough peasant commoners into this just crack team of hoplite soldiers using something called the phalanx, which all of you will get to know well. And the phalanx was 16 by 16 soldiers with these 8 to 10 foot long pikes. It would be like the ancient version of the atom bomb when it first came out. I mean, it was revolutionary in its battlefield tactics. But Philip II never got to realize his dream of taking the fight to the Persians. His son, Alexander the Great, who we talk about a lot in class, took the fight to the Persians, would defeat them in several battles, and would come to dominate Persia, Egypt, all the way to almost into what is modern-day India, where his soldiers mutinied and he would have to turn back. And but anyhow, he was gone on this 13-year-long campaign, which he never returned from. And what is most important about Alexander the Great, because it's one of the most short-lived empires of all time. He conquers this huge, vast empire. He's a Macedonian. He brings with him Greek values and Greek philosophy and learning, but he also does something very amazing. He is all about cultural diffusion. He marries a Persian woman from the Uzbek. He encourages soldiers to stay behind and found little cities called Alexandrias along the way, the biggest being in Egypt. But he founded these little cities called Alexandrias. He was a very humble, modest man, right? Named a bunch of cities after himself. His soldiers would stay behind. They would intermingle with the tribal folk or the people that lived in that area. They would spread their Greek language, their Greek learning, and their Greek values systems to these different areas and regions, and what became valuable was this Greek language called Koine, which means common language. and it greased the wheels for commerce and trade and learning between these vastly different otherwise ethnicities and cultures. And so what you see is this enduring legacy called Hellenism, which was essentially Greek culture spread to Eurasia. Some of the lasting legacies of Hellenism are Koine, the language that helped spread this cultural diffusion, the Olympic Games, direct democracy, or the idea of direct democracy that didn't spread around the Hellenistic world, code of laws, the pulley, the lever, the pump. But there would also be huge, significant achievements in astronomy, where one Greek astronomer would actually estimate the circumference of the world within a few thousand miles of its actual circumference that wouldn't be found out until a few thousand years later. But certainly Alexander's legacy is not exactly in the political boundaries of his empire, which wouldn't exist after his death, but rather Hellenism and cultural diffusion and the Greek learning and the Greek value systems that got spread throughout the Eurasian world, which is even evident to this day. And so those are the major empires that we talk about in class this week. And we'll take a special look at Alexander the Great, and we begin playing this thing called the Empire Game, whereby you will start designing your own society based on what you find to be the most valuable of the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids and the Athenians and the Spartans and eventually the Romans. You'll take a look at them and the Carthaginians around the world, and the Mauryans, of course. So anyhow, that's it for now. That's 1 week in a 11-minute nutshell. So see you down the road.